Over the last 2 years, Azure Stack HCI has opened the door to allow users to begin taking advantage of the hybridization of their on-prem data centers. Cutting-edge features that traditionally were only available in Azure Public Cloud are slowly making their way on-prem. I say slowly kind of loosely, but let's be honest, it's not going to just happen overnight. One glaring hole has always been the ability to automate the creation of these resources on-prem through a unified set of APIs or portal. In other words, like, I don't know, make a VM through Azure Portal or using an ARM template and spitting it out in your data center. That all changes now with Azure Arc VM management. It's in public preview and it's provided by the magic of Resource Bridge. So these are a lot of words you probably don't know, or maybe you do and you want to learn some more. So next up, we're going to go over what it does, how it works, the joys and pains of deploying it, and how it can help you in your hybrid journey. Lighting a candle. This is called Christmas at the Burrow. It is cookies, cinnamon, and vanilla. Oh my goodness. Maybe that's a new thing I should do. Do a different candle for every video. I'll do candle reviews. Alright. So, Resource Bridge and Azure Arc VM management. A lot of word soup there. Maybe you kind of get the idea of what it's trying to do. If not, it's pretty simple. Let's say you have a Hyper-V host or a cluster, in this case an Azure Stack HCI cluster that lives on-prem. But you're a big cloud user, or you're just looking for a way to provide developers an API to communicate down to your HCI cluster to make VMs and turn on VMs and resize VMs and attach them to VNets and create virtual disks, basic VM CRUD operations. Resource Bridge is the thing that allows that communication to happen. And we'll pull up a little drawing whiteboard thing here to kind of demonstrate what it looks like. In layman's terms, the way it works, like Resource Bridge, like here's this term Resource Bridge. What is Resource Bridge? It's too big. I'll probably get yelled at for saying this, but you break it down, you boil it down to its nitty gritty components. It's two things. First thing is a small little agent that runs on all the Azure Stack HCI cluster nodes, so a service. And then there is a small, it's a single VM, and it runs basically Kubernetes in a box. It's running a single, in a VM, a single node Kubernetes cluster that contains a bunch of microservices, so kind of like a black box appliance. You don't really need to worry about what's going on inside of it, but it contains a bunch of microservices that communicate up to the public cloud, to Azure, and also have the ability to interface with that service that's running on your HCI cluster nodes. So it's literally a bridge between Azure Public Cloud and your underlying hardware, or I should say your HCI node. It could be running in a VM if you're using something like MS Lab, or you're just testing it out at home. Doesn't really matter. It is a literal, not figurative, it is a literal bridge that bridges that gap. What does it look like? Well, you're going to see once we're done deploying it by the end of this video. But at the end of the day, when you deploy it, it creates what's called a custom region in Azure that is a manifestation of your on-prem data center, but also the specific cluster it's deployed to. And that would show up as a custom location. If you want to think about it like in the drop-down list when you make a VM and you say like East US or South Central Asia, it's that. It would show up in a list like that. So that's pretty cool. Like at face value, you're literally getting a interface to provide developers, or maybe SREs that you have that need to massively deploy entire groups of VMs, or more importantly, if you're looking to deploy AVD on HCI, an interface to your on-prem hardware. we're going to jump into the actual installation and deployment of Resource Bridge, and then using Azure Arc VM management. I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, if any, showing how to do it through Windows Admin Center. The documentation is pretty straightforward. Some people have had success with it, some people haven't. I'm going to focus more on the PowerShell deployment, only because the pulse in the community is that the Resource Bridge deployment, most people tend to want to do it through PowerShell, and if you end up having problems doing it through WAC, you end up having to kind of touch the PowerShell stuff anyway. So in my opinion, it makes sense to know how the sausage is made and focus on like what's going on behind the scenes and knowing how to recover from issues, what issues you may actually bubble up and experience, and how to get out of them. I also want to use this as an opportunity to call to light the documentation itself and how it can be improved. And I'm not bashing the writers of the documentation for deploying Resource Bridge and subsequently VM management through Arc. It's just maybe you're new to this. Maybe you're a VMware guru and you're trying to look into HCI as a possible alternative. And you're not that familiar with PowerShell or the nuances of PowerShell syntax in general. I found that this documentation is generally weak in that regard. It's making assumptions that maybe folks aren't familiar with. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to demonstrate that, to kind of call it out, and then show a script, or I guess I should say a more sanitized deployment script that I kind of wrote, adopted from it, to show how, in my opinion, I think it should be done. And maybe one day it'll be updated, hopefully. Maybe one day it won't even be deployed this way, hopefully. But that's what we're going to focus on today. Okay, so first thing, your Azure Stack HCI cluster being registered in Azure. This is a good jump off point to go find the documentation on how to actually install this stuff. I don't think there's an actual link on the actual overview page. You could probably get to it by clicking through like the AVD stuff down here, but it's actually faster to just click on the virtual machines resources preview that's listed here. And they have this nice link that's like, hey, Arc Resource Bridge Overview and Setup Guide when using Arc enabled Azure Stack HCI for VM provisioning and management. Whew, say that 10 times fast. Anyway, we're going to click this nice button. And what it's going to do, it's going to bring us over to the documentation for Azure Arc VM management. That's what this video is about. They're going to go over a lot of the bullet points I already discussed about like what it does, the benefits, what is the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. It explains some caveats about putting the resource bridge side by side with the AKS deployment, which kind of leverages the same kind of technologies. If you want them for whatever reason side by side, we haven't done an AKS video yet, but if AKS hybrid video, but if you wanted them side by side and there's a certain order you got to install them in, we're not going to focus on that today. We're going to just focus on this just being a brand new, fresh deployment that's never been deployed with any of this stuff. You may see the term Arc Appliance thrown around. Arc Appliance was an earlier name for Azure Resource Bridge or Arc Resource Bridge. So again, synonymous with each other. Just be aware of that. Additional considerations just to be aware of. You can only have one Arc Resource Bridge deployment on a cluster. Kind of makes sense. But in case you were thinking like, oh, I want multiple tenants to be able to access, no, you can't do anything weird like that. Likewise, I mentioned this earlier, a custom location is actually defined. It may have a unique name about like geographically where it is, but it is defined locally to a single Azure Stack HCI cluster. Obviously, multiple nodes can live in the same cluster, but it is the name for that cluster, not multiple clusters. Each virtual switch can only have one virtual network. It's kind of a no-brainer. This one is a weird one. I'm surprised they even put it in there. Multiple OS images can be added to the gallery. Yeah, we kind of figured that. It's a weird call out, but it's there. And then once you're done, you can add additional virtual networks and images later. Okay, another strange very specific call out. Don't know why they're putting those in there, but good to know. I guess it's a consideration. So anyway, the docs let you, you know, we'll go over the prereqs next, but we're going to focus on using not Windows Admin Center. So first things first, review the prereqs. This is going to be a little bit of a learning curve here. Not too bad. I'll try to draw it out so you can understand it better, but it is good to understand the networking communications. All right. First things first, the actual VM that hosts the Kubernetes appliance itself, what they used to call the Arc appliance, now Arc Resource Bridge. It is, like I said, it is a VM. It needs to have your cluster needs to be able to support a VM that has at least 8 gigs of memory and be able to support 4 virtual CPUs. And you will also need about 50 gigs of clustered storage in the form of a vDisk. Obviously, if you're using HCI, you're probably also using storage spaces direct locally. So you'll need a vDisk created, a CSV that is at least 50 gigs of space. I like to make it a lot bigger than that because you're going to be hosting things in there. So those are the resource prereqs. Pretty straightforward. From the Azure perspective, obviously you'll need a Azure subscription. You got one because if you got HCI, you got an Azure subscription. You will need to, this one's important, you will need to install the Azure command line tools, Azure CLI, on all of your Azure Stack HCI nodes. If that's a problem, because your security team doesn't want anything on these Hyper-V servers, or because you don't touch the fabric once it's deployed other than for certain hard stop. You need it on there. Whether or not you agree or disagree with Microsoft's methodology, you need them on the nodes for this to work. So please, please, please understand that before we continue. The rest of this is kind of like obvious. It's talking about like using RDP to install Azure CLI. Okay, whatever. The last Azure prereq is, oh yeah, this one makes sense, to actually onboard the Resource Bridge appliance as a resource in Azure. You need to have the contributor role available on the resource group you're deploying it to. So you don't necessarily need to be a contributor in the subscription. You don't need to be a global admin in your tenant, but you do need to have the contributor RBAC role on the resource group that this is going to be deployed to. So make sure if you don't have that, talk to your Azure administrators and get that squared away now. And lastly, some networking prereqs. I think this is the last bit. Yeah, this is it. Networking requirements. This can be very simple or this can be very complicated, and it all depends on your environment. For our example, in my home lab, I have a flat network. That means my Azure Stack HCI nodes are sitting on the same subnet and VLAN as the VMs that are deployed on there, which means that when I go and deploy my Azure Arc Resource Bridge VM Kubernetes appliance thing, and it's attached to the vSwitch, it's going to end up getting an IP address on the same flat subnet as my Hyper-V hosts or as my HCI hosts. So from a networking port requirement, I don't really got to worry about that because there's no firewall for that traffic to traverse through from the VM to the management nodes. In a production environment, you most likely will have these subnets segregated for security purposes. They may even be in different domains and VLAN, literal VLAN subnet broadcast domains. If that's the case, make sure that you speak to your networking team to have the following ports opened. I think the direction, these are going to be ports that are going to be listening on the Hyper-V nodes themselves, the HCI nodes themselves. Like I mentioned, there's a service that's deployed on all the nodes, and they will be listening on these 4 ports for various communication purposes. So that means your HCI management network, the Hyper-V nodes, the HCI nodes themselves will need to have those ports allowed into them. And lastly, this one is also important. Again, not really a scenario in my home lab. the outbound, the egress traffic. These things need to communicate with Azure on port 443 over HTTPS. If you're air gapped or you have a proxy or you're very, very micro segmented with what traffic is allowed out of that network, again, speak to your networking team. Make sure these specific URLs are whitelisted to your firewall, however you have that done. But again, for the sake of this example, we're not going to be dealing with that. We're not dealing with a proxy or anything either. So it makes it a little bit easier for us. Set up using Azure CLI. More prereqs. Make sure you go and do the prereqs first. So I'll walk you through all this. Before we even start doing anything, I just want to showcase the steps and call out a few things here. So if you were to deploy this from PowerShell, this is what you got to do. You have to, on your Azure Stack HCI, on all the servers in your HCI cluster, you need to make sure that you have the latest version of PowerShell get installed. That's the repo for officially published PowerShell modules. So once you get that installed, you will need to install the module mock and Arc HCI. Those are going to be the two sets of commandlets that will, or I should say the two modules that contain the sets of commandlets for obviously deploying all this stuff. Great, no problem. And then once all that is installed, they want you to run these lines of code, run these lines of PowerShell with some predetermined settings in them. And they go over what the settings are. And for the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty good. My beef is the just like complete disregard for PowerShell syntax here. Like if you were to copy and paste this into, let's say, ISE or a notepad, a text file or whatever, and again, assuming you're new to PowerShell, you like the word, I don't know, I feel like this should be commented out. I feel like there should literally be a pound sign here. I feel like there should be a pound sign here, pound sign. Why are there examples literally in the verbatim static string in line? What's going on here? Is this even terminate? Yeah, I guess it ends here. And then there's more comments outside of it. It's just gibberish. It doesn't make sense. I mean, like if you're familiar with it, you can parse it, you can get what they're asking, but I don't know. I've never seen Microsoft documentation this, I'm hesitating to say the word bad or sloppy, but I've never seen anything that resembles this. So with that being said, here it is. Here are the descriptions of what these things need to do. And we're not going to spend more time than we need to here because I've sanitized it elsewhere. And I will pull that up in a few moments. Okay, so like I said, I have a curated set of instructions that I've used repeatedly over the past couple years, or I guess couple weeks, not years. Oh my goodness, feels like years. What this is doing is just grabbing the latest version of the Azure CLI tools, specifically for Windows, the installer. It's downloading it, running it locally on the node. You need to run this on all the nodes in your cluster. You can use a for loop that maybe invokes this command across all the nodes, or you can open up two RDP sessions and do it manually. In my case, I'm just doing it over RDP to the node itself. I only have one node in this cluster anyway, so it doesn't really matter for me. We're going to let this finish installing. Okay, and that's done. That took about maybe total like 60 seconds, 2 minutes maybe at most. I wasn't really paying attention. And then it just deletes the installer for you there, so that's good. Mentioned earlier, you need to have a dedicated volume for all of this. So I am calling my volume MOC01, MOC01. It will be a 300 gigabyte volume. It will be of provisioning type thin, so I'm not actually going to be thick consuming 300 gig up front. A little greedy of me, but I'm on a home lab and I'm on a budget. I'm going to make our new CSV. Bing, bang, boom. I'm flat SSD. There's no tiering going on or anything here. I don't have any NVMe. I don't have any HD in the picture. Just single media type. And if I do get virtual disk, just to show you, there she is. And I have a few other CSVs on this cluster, or in this case, it's a single node cluster. It's still a cluster. We need to install the PowerShell modules that they want us. So first, we're going to make sure that we got NuGet installed, or I should say the package provider installed, which I'm pretty sure I do, but we'll make sure I got the latest version. Let's see if it throws any errors. So surprisingly, it did. It complained about NuGet. That's strange. Very, very interesting. But like I said, I already have it. And it may just be a local problem for me. That is a weird warning. I've never seen that before. But the modules are installing. I'm getting Mock. I'm getting Arc HCI, so I don't really need to worry. All right, good. So we got the latest ones in. Cool. Specifically calls out restart PowerShell. And that's because if you have the modules still lingering in memory, you may run into some issues. So we're going to do that real quick. Boom. Cool. And now we will initialize mock node. This will set up some services. It kind of walks you through it. Make sure your cluster's healthy. If there's a service that needs to be restarted, it's I don't know if I've actually ever seen it fail. So if it does, I think it throws a warning at you. These are important. You need to restart PowerShell again. It's annoying, I know, but again, it's to make sure stale modules aren't lingering around. So now we get to the point where we're actually configuring this stuff. These are variables that I've kind of predetermined already. My IP range that I want to use here. So the control plane IP, which is the Kubernetes node, the single VM, it's going to have the IP address ending in 36. The VM, this is funny. The control plane IP is actually going to be like a load balanced IP internally. The VM IP is the actual VM itself, running like the Linux OS. The cloud service IP will be, again, because I'm running a failover cluster, even though it's only one node, there will be a custom resource representing the service with a client access IP address that will be .38. My gateway is my gateway. My DNS server is my DNS server. If you have multiple DNS servers, you need to provide a list here, so it's comma separated. I only have one though. The IP address prefix is going to be the CIDR range I described before, which is basically, hey, what's your subnet, and then what's your / notation at the end. I do not have a VLAN ID. This is a flat network, so I don't need to do any tagging. But this is where if you access tag your stuff, you would put in like 200 or whatever. And then obviously your CSV path, which is the location where all this stuff gets deployed to on your cluster. That's that virtual disk we just made. Before I copy all this and paste it, I do want to call out that my resource group is going to be the string, the name of it in actual Azure, my subscription ID, the location I chose. I am based in the United States, so I'm going to use East US, and then the custom location name. So again, that is, I want to again be very, very clear. The custom location name is just a friendly display name. It can be anything you want. It can literally be called I love Apple, whatever, it doesn't matter. But it is specifically one-to-one bound to your HCI cluster itself. It is not an actual representation of your data center where your HCI cluster is. So don't call it, Ernie's data center, because if you have another cluster you got to onboard, you can't group them under that, at least not yet. And I doubt they're ever going to do it. So it has to be maybe something along the lines of location dash cluster name or rack and row or whatever you want to use. So I'm going to copy and paste this all in, and we're going to configure the next line in a moment. This commandlet, pretty sure it goes pretty quick. New mock network setting is going to take all of the variables that we just configured, bundle it up into an object. In this case, I called it money sign VNet, a variable called money sign VNet, and then we're going to pass it to the commandlet set mock config, which is going to take all those variables we configured. It's going to configure the services on all the Hyper-V hosts that we spoke about earlier with the IP addresses. It's going to make sure there's actual connectivity to endpoints hosted on Microsoft servers and in Azure. And when it's done, we're going to end up having our mock configuration done. It's already done. It looks like it finished in about 15 seconds. And we are ready for an install, which is the next line here. Install mock config. Install mock config, or rather install mock, is now that config was created in the line above it, it's actually going to pull down, copy, expand a zip file, and then provision. You can see the step right now: provisioning mock agents, provisioning Cloud Agent CA. This is these are the actual. This is the clustered resource that represents the service that lives on all those hosts. That was the purple little circle icon I demonstrated before. And it's going to assign a IP address and create a DNS entry in our DNS server. You can see that there, ca-guid.homelab.erniecosta.com. And that allows us to have a highly available service. Even though it's running on all the nodes, it is highly available. It is backed by an IP address, or I should say fronted by an IP address for endpoints to access it on those 4 ports we discussed earlier. The next set of instructions are to upgrade the any old Azure CLI extensions you may have. We already installed them earlier, so we're not going to be doing this. Clean that up. We're going to first remove anything. Add the extensions again. The next step, while we're waiting for this to download, validate, and do everything, is to actually log in interactively. Well, I guess it's not, it's kind of interactively. We're going to log in to Azure on each node. And to do that, we're using device codes. So what that does is on the Azure Stack HCI command line utility, it will give us basically a one-time password. You copy and paste that into a browser session, maybe in this case on a completely different node because we don't have a browser on Azure Stack HCI. So off screen, you won't see it, but I'll go to portal.azure.com. It actually tells you the URL. You copy and paste the code in, and it's like when you onboard your YouTube account on a Fire Stick or a Chromecast or whatever. It gives you a little code. It does the authentication for you that way, so you don't need to be actually MFAing on a command line session. We're gonna copy all of this in now. It's gonna give me the code first. Go. So it tells me to go to this web page, device login. I'm off screen on my authenticated session already. Copying and pasting this code in. I have just MFA'd on that device. And we should see this continue in a moment. There it goes. You can see my user and username, my tenant ID. Boom, boom, boom. All right. Registered providers are registered. Bear in mind, This process may take a few minutes for you if you've never onboarded these namespaces before on your subscription. They may take a few minutes. This flew for me because I've done this before in my subscription. We're now going to configure resource bridge. That's just complaining that the folder already exists, so it's not able to make the folder. What this did was it made a JSON config file. Again, this is all automated. I didn't make this. This is just Microsoft stuff. It basically bundled up all the IP address stuff we mentioned earlier, made a YAML and JSON file out of it, and put it in this folder for the next step where we say, hey, make the appliance. So the next couple things are these highlighted commands, which will, at the end of the day, give us, oops, copy, paste. I think it'll end up spitting out a Kubernetes config file into my user profile when it's all said and done. So it looks like downloaded the image. It's going to spin everything up now, and it can take up to 30 minutes. So we're gonna speed this up. Skip ahead. If we have any failures, I'll be sure to hop in. But I think for the most part, we're on autopilot right now. We are waiting for this point. We're on the deploy phase. So we're going to let these run their course. All right, so if you're not familiar with like AKS or anything like that, what's going on right now is if we run get VM, this is what I told you before. There's a control plane VM that's created. This is a VM that's got, like I said, 8 gigs. It probably has 4 vCPUs, and what's going on inside of it, it's running a version of Linux called Mariner OS that is spinning up and creating a Kubernetes cluster internal to itself, and downloading some pods, some containers from Microsoft endpoints to spin up small microservices that host things like Cloud Operator, or I think there's going to be one called like Arc Appliance, and maybe even Billing Operator, stuff like that. And these are all microservices that will live and be regulated and contained inside the this VM that's running Kubernetes that do a multitude of things. Most of them will communicate up to the public Azure cloud for metadata information, sending stuff back and forth for synchronization in public Azure. Some of these containers will be running just strictly to interact with your HCI cluster nodes themselves. Again, maybe like making a VM or deleting a VM or telling the VM to turn on or off. These are all small images that need to be downloaded, and by images, the word contain. You probably know what a container is at this point. They're all container images that are getting pulled down. All right, we're done with the Arc Appliance deploy and the Arc Appliance create. So now what we need to do is run this commandlet to see if the resource is ready. This is basically, you could do the same thing if you go to the Azure portal, go to the resource group, and just keep hitting refresh to see if the thing's in there and if it's in a ready state. So let's see. We have provisioning state equals succeeded. So you may take 1 to 2 minutes, it may take 5 minutes, it may take 10 minutes. They say it can take up to 5 minutes. This seems to have created very, very quickly for me. And I'm over in another window. You're not going to be able to see it, but I am in Azure Portal in the resource group that I specified earlier, and I do see the item there. It's literally called Azure Stack HCI-CL. It's the name I gave earlier, -Arc Bridge. So it's what we see here. Cool. So the next step after now is to actually configure some more extensions for VM capabilities to be installed on our cluster. So it's this line of stuff. This is another one that will take a, oh, I thought I copied it. This is another command that can take up to 5 minutes before it actually registers and does what it has to in the portal. So we're going to, again, let this run. And once it's done, we will run this show Kate extension commandlet to see if it shows up. It'll take a few minutes. All right, great. We're gonna see if it's ready. Copy this. I don't think it'll be ready yet. Oh, provisioning state equals succeeded, so maybe it is ready. All right then. Let's check. Look. Yeah, it looks good. We're gonna finally make the custom location. This is the name we gave earlier. I think it's called, let's see, custom lock name was the variable. So it is going to make a custom location called that. Copy, paste. And this is going to be the representation of my cluster sitting in my basement in Azure. This looks like an Azure portal now. Let's see if I can flip the window capture over to Edge. There we go. Wow, that worked seamlessly. That was so cool. All right. So right here we got my resource group called RG Resource Bridge. We go in here. We're going to see that there's two things located in here: the resource bridge and the custom location. So this is kind of like a no-brainer. If I go to the resource bridge, you can see there's not really much to see in here. Its status is running. The operating system is Linux. So this is the Kubernetes virtual appliance thing that we deployed on our host. This is the representation of it in the portal. I'm sure there's some metadata in here in the properties section where it kind of gives some information about, what provider is it running, HCI, and what distribution of the, whatever. A lot of this is going to be nonsense and irrelevant to you, but probably helpful from like a troubleshooting perspective. If you go poking around, a lot of this is what I showed in the PowerShell output, the JSON output when I was waiting for the provider to be ready. This is where it's located. You'll also see here the custom locations tab is located. If I click this, there will be a single custom location. We also saw it backed up a few pages ago. If I click in here, again, not many things in here, but we can drill down. Arc enabled services. So this is where different cluster extensions will show up. Right now, we have the VM operator extension. That was one of the command line options we ran earlier. I'm going to click on add just to see if anything else is in here. I don't think anything else is currently available as of like December 2022, but I imagine this is where other things would show up as they become available. Maybe one day they do, like, I don't know, storage accounts or key vault on-prem or whatever. This is where those things would be exposed. Clicking on resources. So these are going to be, I'm not sure if these are things I've made. These are probably things I made in the past. I think normally you wouldn't see anything here. These are probably things that I made testing, and they're still showing up because the metadata is here. So if you were to click this, you wouldn't see anything here. This is where, as you go and deploy self-service VMs and maybe a VNIC or a virtual hard disk, this is where they would show up. Again, properties page, a lot of metadata for troubleshooting. Kind of cool to look at if you don't want to go drilling through Azure command line and scraping JSON payloads. So you can kind of see it here. Okay, so what can we do with this right now without touching anything else? So we're back in the Azure portal. We're in our Azure Stack HCI resource. If we go back to that virtual machine page that we clicked on very, very beginning that brought us to the documentation page, you can notice now it is not the same. It actually looks a lot friendlier, or at least it's saying, hey, You're in preview mode. This may not be the full list of VMs on the cluster. Only VMs created from Azure Portal are shown here. What that's trying to tell you is things that you didn't make through Resource Bridge and Azure Portal and Azure VM Self-Service, they're not going to just magically show up here. This isn't a VM aggregator. It's not like a data center management tool like VMM or whatever. This is going to be net new things created through the Resource Bridge connection. And that kind of makes sense. So it's saying I can create a VM. Let's see what that can even do. I don't know if it's going to work. We're going to find out. So this will look familiar if you've ever made a VM in Azure Portal before. It's asking for the subscription. I only got one. It's asking for where you want to dump the VM, what resource group. So we're going to make a new one called RG self-service demo. What do you want to call it? We're going to call it self-service demo. Oh, well, that's too long. Let's just call it self-01. And you can see the custom location is already pre-filled here. I can't change this. The drop-down doesn't let me fiddle with this. I'm not sure if that will ever change. I'm not sure if that's because I'm creating it directly through the Azure Stack HCI UI and it just like auto forces me into doing that. Not a big deal. Image. So now here's where my curiosity is a little piqued. I haven't configured any custom images or uploaded anything to the marketplace. So nothing shows up right away. No images are available in your Azure Stack HCI cluster. To create new images on your cluster, you got to click Manage VM Images. Okay, let's click that. So you can see it's backed me out, brought me back to the Azure Stack HCI object in the resource in Azure, and now I'm not in the VMs page, I'm in the VM Images tab. A limited experience is available as the features in preview. Click here to provide your feedback. Not going to provide the feedback. There are no VM images present on this cluster. So what this is going to do, there we go. So this is going to give me three options right now. So again, fresh deployment. I can either deploy, or I guess I can allocate a VM image from the Azure Marketplace. So that's an existing VM image. If I have an image already uploaded to a storage account that I have access to, I can deploy it from that. So that's going to be like a managed disk. Or if I have an image stored on a local share to my cluster, I can deploy that. So that's going to be, again, custom image that maybe you already have, like a VHDX, that maybe you have a gold image for deployments you use, whatever. We're going to click on Azure Marketplace for now, because I think this is kind of, we talked about this in another video with Ben Thomas and Jan Peterson about like the bread and butter of this. I think Ben used the term the golden goose, and I couldn't agree more with this. The ability to have access to pre-made Azure Marketplace images without having to do the song and dance, download the image through Azure CLI or AZ copy and then touch it and transform, just like you just get it, like it's just there. That to me is unbelievable. So what do we got here? It wants me to, all right, I got to create an image. I need to dump it into a resource group, which kind of makes sense. So let's do this. So let's call it, what do I got? Well, I already have a resource group called Resource Bridge. We're going to put it in there. Save image as. Well, let's see what image, this order is a little silly. I feel like the image to download should be the first thing you get, not the save image as, because I don't know what I'm even downloading yet and what I want to call it. So right now it looks very, very limited with what you can download. And they are limiting this right now to these these six images. So you got your Windows Server 2022 SKU, specifically the Azure edition, your Windows 11 multi-session host images, so that's going to be for your AVD workloads, and likewise your Windows 10 multi-session images, again for your AVD workloads. Curiously, they're all 21H2, which means product group hasn't touched this in months, because 22H2 for all of this has been out for at least long enough since this video has been made that it should be an option here. But I digress. we're gonna keep it simple. We're just gonna make a Windows Server image. We're gonna do a what do we got here? Core or regular? Core will be tiny, go kind of fast. We'll do that, and we're gonna call the image WS 2022 DC AZ G2. Sure, sounds good. Why not? I'm not using tags. I guess you can use them if you want for automation later, but we're just going to do that. So this is now going to create an image on my host. And to show you what this looks like, let's see if I can flip back. Let's see if I can. All right, so what we're doing now is in the Azure portal, it's telling my cluster to download that Windows Server image. So what I'm doing here is waiting to see, and now we can see it. My network connection is now getting slammed. This image is getting downloaded at about 250 megabits per second. I'm on a 5G connection at my house, so like anything over 100 meg is pretty good for me. And there's literally a like compressed VHDX that's getting downloaded to my my cluster right now as a managed disk. Let's see if I can actually go find it. So we can see after that massive file downloaded that the deployment is successful. If I go to resource, see what it does. What does this actually do? Okay, it is an image. I don't think there's any metadata here we can really look at. Interesting, but nothing really that useful. It's about 7 gigs in size. So go back. So that's how it shows up. So it dumps it right in there. Cool. All right, so let's go back to our Azure Stack HCI object or resource in the portal. If I go to VM images, it's probably going to show up here as well. It does, great. Click virtual machines. I should now be able to click create. We already went through this before. We're going to call this, make a new RG called RG. Oh, what are we calling this? Self-service demo. Call it self 1. There's my marketplace image. There's only one. I can give it however many CPUs I want and RAM. That's probably a little too much, but whatever. Let's see. Can I use admin or is it going to yell at me? Oh, cool. Administrator? Oh, even better. Guest management allows you to run governance, monitor, and update management security features. Yeah, sure. What is this claim? So it does yell at you. Okay. Can I do admin? That works. That's funny. All right, this is where you can add the data disks. So by default, you have your OS disk, just like in traditional Azure. In this case, I'm just making a data disk. Why not? We're going to call it data 1. I don't think you need to specify an extension. We're going to make it 100 gigs. It is dynamic. Go to networking. Add a network interface to enable guest management for this VM, but I don't have a network interface defined or a VNet defined. So if I click this, it's going to say no available items. So I am stuck right now. Now, what does that mean? Well, I jumped the gun a bit. Remember, I was like, let's just see if we can deploy this because let's see how the user experiences. When you're done with the documentation, they kind of say like, you know, what you got to do that. One of those things is creating a virtual network. So I'm going to open this tab up here. You could do it through Windows Admin Center, or you could do it through Azure CLI. we already have my virtual switch. Thankfully, this one's pretty easy. You just need to basically run some command line tools, or I'm sorry, some command line uh, uh, settings to basically allocate something in the metadata to present a what's called a virtual network to the resource bridge. So I have that actually. I have that here. It was in my script the whole time. It's this little ditty here. We don't need to worry about the VLAN ID because that's commented out. Might help if I move my face out of the way. Can I do this quickly? Well, no. Oh, I can. That'll put me right here. So VLAN ID. We don't need to worry about that. It's commented out right there. The VNet name is just going to basically be what we're calling the you'll see. Default group location, mock location. These are things that are static. We're not going to change. Again, kind of weird that they're making you specify it. Windows Admin Center kind of obfuscates it for you though. So let's go ahead and just run this. I do not know how long this takes to actually register. I'd be willing to bet it could take up to 5 minutes. Based on the rest of our experience so far, it's been pretty quick. So we're going to hope it goes quick here as well. Take a look here. Refresh that. Oh, I'm not going to refresh it actually. I'm just going to click this. And now you can see my VNet is there. So this is what I was trying to get to before. So we're going to call this just as VNet 1 on our VM that we were creating. I don't think I'm going to be allowed to. It's weird. I'm surprised I can't change that, but it's okay. So now we have one interface, the network it's attached to, IPv4 it's saying it's going to be dynamic. Don't know if that was something that we're allowed to change. Let's take a look, make sure I didn't miss it. I don't see. I only see network type transparent. I don't see anything in here saying that I can allow static IPs. It's weird. But we'll go ahead and just to demonstrate, we're going to submit the deployment. And now this is the familiar, Azure deployment page that you see, where you can look at the template itself. This is, if you're familiar with ARM, this is going to be the JSON payload that's basically doing it all. All right, and we can see that this failed. And this one actually doesn't come as a surprise to me. One of the nuances of how Resource Bridge decides to place the VMs is it just picks any of the CSVs that are available to it, at least based on the documentation that's provided as of today. So I don't know if you remember, we made a dedicated CSV earlier called mock 01, and that is where the that single node VM Kubernetes appliance thing got downloaded to, and its VM data and everything is stored there. Subsequently, downloading the marketplace gallery image didn't go to that directory. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. That is just for the Kubernetes appliance. So where does it go? Well, it just goes wherever it wants to go. Let's take a look at this error real quick, and you can see the file copy failed when trying to copy the file from this folder, which is a CSV that we did not tell anywhere to use, to this folder, which is another CSV. So basically, I have a CSV called SOFS01 to template01. There's not enough space. No kidding, there's not enough space. Those are volumes I'm using for something else. And this just decided to put them there and copy between each other. So let's flip over to this, and we can see if I cd cluster storage, you'll see that there's this is a share that I made. months ago, and there's a folder here called auto config container 2. And in here is another folder, and there's our marketplace image, our 130 something gig VHD. That's like, I don't want that there. I want that somewhere else. Maybe I want to use deduplication. Maybe if I download like all the marketplace images, I want them on one volume and I run dedupe on it so it's nice and compressed. Maybe I want all my Azure deployments to go to a certain subset of volumes, that if I was using storage tiering, maybe high performance disks, I want them to go there, or maybe I just want to, I don't know. And I'm sure that they're going to clean this up, but this is a problem, because as you can see, as prescribed through their documentation, these are all the issues you're going to run into just by trying to use it. Honestly, I don't know how to get around this. I don't know if it uses a round robin thing to pick what volume to put the stuff in. I don't know if it's just like alphabetically sorting and picking. I guess it's not alphabetically sorting and picking it because they're just putting them anywhere. So maybe it's based on percent free space, but that's silly because percent free space is not necessarily mean it has the amount of free space. As we can tell from this error message that it started copying without checking if it had enough room. That's stupid. So here we are. We've been at it for almost, I've been at it for a couple hours now, but as far as this video is concerned, it's only really been like 20, 30 minutes. Yeah, this is something I'm not too keen on right now. So, all right, I've literally combed through the troubleshooting page and the FAQ, and there's nothing in here describing it as a limitation. I mean, literally, they call out limitations and known issues, and they talk about things like, uniqueness in resource name, making sure Azure command line stuff is installed on your hosts. Don't install this side by side with AKS hybrid in the incorrect order. Projected VMs will not include things that already exist. You have to update VMs through the Azure management plane. In other words, you can't go into Hyper-V Manager and touch the VM to update its RAM, otherwise it'll just freak out. That's basically it in terms of the limitations. It's only available in the English language. Sorry, everyone. If the Arc for servers agents are installed on VM, okay, this is saying you may see two of the same VM if you install the Arc for server agent, which I think may not be a thing going forward. And then they give you some naming I love naming suggestions. They give you some naming suggestions to look at. What else do we got here? The FAQ. Let's see what we got. Can they coexist? Can you use SDN? It's currently not supported. This is if you're not using AD. Is there a fee? The answer is no. Can I use the same name for gallery image projections will the existing VMs use the new image? Okay, so that's a weird one. If you deploy a VM with image ABC, and then you go and delete image ABC, and you redeploy a new image with a new build or something, and it's also called ABC, will that magically work? There's some nonsense like that, and that's good to know. But how can I delete a gallery image? You got to use, yep, okay. So don't just delete the file. If I delete the gallery image, would the VMs also get deleted? No. If I reinstall Resource Bridge, will the VMs also be redeployed? That's an interesting one. If it's deleted, then management will be unavailable. The VMs will still remain and only will be manageable through on-prem. That makes sense. Redeploying will not enable Arc Manager of the existing VMs. Okay, kind of makes sense. We did see metadata lingering around. What should I do if redeploying Arc Bridge doesn't succeed? So, combing through this entire thing, there is nothing to describe how to limit the deployment of your VMs to specific CSVs. There is nothing to describe how to specify a CSV for your marketplace image storage. This is so. It's preview. it's like preview. It's immature preview. And it's hard for me to say this is something that you should be using for any form of production workload other than the most basic of basics. Like you have an Azure Stack HCI cluster, its only job is going to be running VMs that you create through the Resource Bridge appliance, and you just like create like 20 CSVs of all the same type and tiering and whatever performance, and it's like, hope the VM gets deployed somewhere, and then based on the nonsense we saw about the like storage picking logic, like it picked a volume that didn't have enough space for the file copy. That's kind of weird. I feel like this can be improved with block cloning. So in other words, if you had the ability to specify a volume and the marketplace image was on that volume already, then leverage block cloning to just basically instantly make the copy. I also am not really sure why. I mean, I understand why the VHD comes down as a VHD, and it's thick provision. That's just how AZ copy works. There are literally like two additional very quick steps with Hyper-V that you can run to convert VHD to a VHDX, and then from there, in that same one liner, it's not even two steps, it's one step. Convert VHD to a VHDX, and then also specify it as a dynamically expanding disk. So that allows you to not have a 130 gig, 127 gig VHD, but instead maybe a 10, 20, 30 gig VHDX. There's still VHD files lingering around because of some ARM limitations. Uh, but if this is running on-prem, there's no reason for it to be doing that. So I think those are like the big things that product groups should be focusing on right now, making that experience actually make sense. So this video will be a to be continued, um, and hopefully in the next couple weeks or months we have something that we can demonstrate as a like this is rock solid. This made strides. Again, I want to reiterate, this is in public preview. Microsoft is not going to tell you to run this in prod, but this is going to be the guts that basically fuels things like AVD HCI scaling or VM scale sets on prem one day. Like this is going to be I use the term the thing that makes the sausage. This is going to be the thing that drives all that. So they need to get this squared away. It's very cool. I love the fact that I can have ARM templates. I can like go into Azure DevOps and kick off a release pipeline and VM show up on prem. Like that's so cool. Anywhere around the world. Uh, think about like new hires, maybe in a remote branch office that has a small single node deployment, and just like you're just spitting out VMs to the Azure portal for them. That's so cool, but it's it's limited right now. So we're gonna we're gonna come back. We're gonna rewind back to this one day, and we're gonna have some hopefully some really happy updates.